They didn't need guns to rob the government, just contracts, lawyers, and a single building deed. If you love stories of hidden corruption, mob money, and the quiet deals that bled America dry, make sure to follow, because this one shows how the Mafia turned bureaucracy into its biggest racket. New York City, April 12, 1978. 10:15 a.m. A government sedan stops outside 120 Hudson Street, a gray, six-story warehouse leased by the General Services Administration. Inside, workers for the Army Corps of Engineers sort files under humming fluorescent lights. They don't know the rent they pay each month, $48,000 in taxpayer money, is flowing straight into the pockets of two men with no government job at all. Their names, Anthony Salerno and Vincent DiNapoli, reputed members of the Genovese crime family. The building is officially owned by Riverside Development Corp., a front company registered in Delaware. But Riverside doesn't own anything except a post office box and a single piece of paper, the deed to 120 Hudson Street. That deed has been sold, repurchased, and sold again, each time to another shell corporation, created by the same lawyers, the same accountants, and the same silent investors. On the books, the property has changed hands 6 times in 4 years. Each sale was financed by a federally backed loan, guaranteed by agencies like HUD and the Small Business Administration. Each time, the price jumped by hundreds of thousands. The value of the building has tripled, though nothing about it, not the paint, not the wiring, has changed. To the mob, this isn't real estate. It's a money-printing machine. The scam begins in 1975 during New York's fiscal crisis. City agencies are desperate for space. Federal departments are leasing anything with a roof. The GSA outsources its property management to private contractors, a perfect opening for the Mafia's construction cartel. A Genovese associate named Edward "Eddie the Glove" DeLucia introduces a small-time developer to the family's Concrete Club, a network of companies that control nearly every major project in Manhattan. They specialize in bid rigging and paper flipping, winning public contracts through intimidation and then reselling the paper rights to other mob-linked firms. By 1977, they've moved beyond construction. They start buying entire buildings, leasing them to government tenants, and then reselling those same properties through fake holding companies. Each sale is justified by a new appraisal, always inflated, always backed by friendly bankers who owe favors. The profit isn't in rent, it's in the refinancing. Every resale triggers new loans, new insurance, and new closing fees. The mob skims a percentage from every transaction. On average, 10% of every mortgage check disappears into cash envelopes that circulate through social clubs in the Bronx and Brooklyn. At a meeting inside the East Harlem Social Club, Salerno lays out the formula on a yellow pad. "You keep the same walls," he says, tapping the table, "but you change the name on the door. Every time the government signs the lease again, they pay more. We just give them paper." DiNapoli nods. He controls several union locals that can guarantee silence. No audits, no work stoppages. Lawyers on retainer handle the corporate paperwork. Bankers from a Midtown Savings and Loan approve the loans. Within months, 3 more buildings join the list, one in Queens, one near the Brooklyn Navy Yard, one in Newark. Each is a clone of the Hudson Street setup, a modest warehouse suddenly sold to another owner at double the price. By 1979, the group has created more than 20 shell companies. Each exists only on paper, with addresses like Suite 404 Lexington Avenue, a room that holds a single phone line and a secretary who knows to say nothing. When federal rent checks arrive, they're deposited into accounts that disappear, within days, transferred to offshore banks in the Bahamas, or funneled into construction payrolls. The FBI doesn't notice at first. Property flipping isn't violent, it's boring, and that's why it works. But one man does notice. Special Agent Thomas Kessler, newly assigned to the Bureau's Organized Crime Squad in Manhattan. In 1980, he flags an unusual pattern. Several GSA buildings changing ownership repeatedly between the same group of lawyers. The transactions look legitimate, yet the sales prices don't match the city's property records. Kessler writes in his memo, "Potential leaseback inflation, possible organized crime involvement." His supervisor underlines one word, possible, and shelves it. Meanwhile, the scam keeps growing. Between 1978 and 1982, the network resells 120 Hudson Street 10 times. Each sale pushes the rent higher, and each loan brings in new cash. The total skimmed nearly $9 million, all before taxes, all before the government realizes it's been paying the same landlords under 10 different names. The money flows into legitimate fronts: trucking firms, restaurants, a Long Island marina. Salerno and DiNapoli become silent partners in a half-dozen new companies, all clean on paper. In 1983, a HUD auditor finally catches the anomaly. While reviewing a refinancing request, he finds the same building's appraisal history showing 10 different ownerships in 8 years, yet identical tenant signatures, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. He alerts the Inspector General. Within weeks, the FBI opens a formal inquiry under a new code name, Leaseback. Investigators subpoena loan records, find cross-signed guarantees, and trace payments to companies already on the Bureau's organized crime watch list. One memo reads, "Pattern identical to previous Lucchese construction fraud. Recommend undercover infiltration." The Bureau begins assigning undercover accountants to follow the paper trail, but by the time they reach the 5th holding company, it has already dissolved. Each layer folds before it can be subpoenaed. It's a chess game, and the mob is still 2 moves ahead. In December 1984, the FBI quietly contacts the IRS Criminal Investigation Division to examine the tax returns of the shell companies. That's when they discover the scheme's true scale. At least 30 federal leases across New York and New Jersey were controlled by mob fronts, generating more than $100 million in inflated sales and financing. The Bureau's report calls it the most complex non-violent corruption racket ever tied to organized crime. But arrests don't come yet. The evidence is circumstantial. No witnesses, no recordings, only paper. To break the case, they'll need someone inside the network, and one is about to appear. Brooklyn, May 1985. 8:40 p.m. A small-time accountant named Louis Ferraro walks into the FBI field office. He's nervous, holding a briefcase filled with contracts and cancelled checks. Ferraro worked for one of DiNapoli's front companies. He's been moving numbers from one shell to another for years. Now he's been shorted on his cut. He tells the agents, "You want to know how they make millions off one building? I'll show you the papers. That briefcase will unravel everything." FBI Headquarters, Manhattan Field Office, June 3, 1985, 9:30 a.m. The briefcase sits on the conference table. Brown leather, scuffed at the corners, labeled Ferraro. Inside are 12 property contracts, 31 cashier's checks, and handwritten ledgers with initials that match names already known to the Bureau: A. Salerno, V. DiNapoli, E. DeLucia. Special Agent Thomas Kessler flips through each document. The handwriting is neat, the signatures identical. One name, Riverside Development Corp., appears 10 times. Another, Lexington Realty Holdings, appears on 3 consecutive contracts. Both are registered to the same Midtown address, Suite 404. "They didn't even change the suite number," Kessler mutters. The agents begin tracing the money. Each sale of 120 Hudson Street leads to a new loan from the Hudson Valley Savings and Loan. The loan officer who approved them is Michael Torre, a former union treasurer with quiet ties to the Lucchese family. The pattern is perfect. One mob-controlled company sells the building to another. The buyer finances the purchase through a loan. The government renews the lease, now at a higher rent. The previous owner is paid out, but the money never leaves the family. It's a revolving door made of cash. August 1985. Brooklyn FBI surveillance teams move in. They bug Salerno's East Harlem social club, wiring the ceiling above his poker table. Within weeks, they record over 50 conversations about leases, rent bumps, and paperwork jobs. The word government is never spoken, but context is clear. On one tape, DiNapoli laughs, "We own that building more than God does." Another voice responds, "Don't worry, Tony, the feds rent from us now." To prosecutors, it's the first real proof the mob is skimming. Federal money through real estate, manipulation. The FBI teams up with the IRS Criminal Investigation Division and the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. The joint operation receives an official name, Leaseback. Operation Leaseback begins with accountants, not agents. A small team inside the IRS uses financial tracking software to cross-reference HUD loans with GSA rental payments. They find over 80 properties in the tri-state area, showing the same pattern: repeated ownership changes, rising appraisals and overlapping signatories. Most are warehouses, storage buildings or maintenance depots, the kind of places no one ever visits or inspects. One is even leased by the Department of Veterans Affairs, paying rent to a mob front. Every transaction follows the same playbook. The shell companies use the same lawyers, the same appraisers, the same banks. The profit is small per deal, but multiplied across dozens of buildings, it's massive. Between 1978 and 1985, the network moves more than $100 million through federal leases. In September 1985, Kessler's team receives approval for an undercover operation. 2 agents, posing as representatives from a fictitious property firm called Metro Capital Leasing, approached DiNapoli's accountant with an offer to co-manage a GSA lease. The accountant takes the bait. He sets up a meeting at a Manhattan steakhouse. The agents arrive wearing wire transmitters. DiNapoli shows up 20 minutes late, wearing a tan suit and gold watch. Over whiskey, he outlines the racket without ever saying a criminal word. You keep the same building. You change the paper. Government never asks. They just pay. He taps his glass. We don't steal from them. We lease to them. The line becomes the informal slogan for the operation. By 1986, the case expands. The FBI raids the offices of Riverside Development, Lexington Realty, and Metro Construction Corp. As agents seize file cabinets filled with loan applications, fake invoices, and bank transfer receipts. One folder labeled HUD Refinance contains a handwritten ledger listing payments to political consultants. Among the entries, $15,000, councilman approval; $8,000, city clerk expedite; $2,500, zoning pass. Corruption runs deeper than the mob. It stretches into city politics, banks, and property assessors. The Bureau briefs the Department of Justice. The Attorney General authorizes a federal racketeering indictment under RICO statutes, charging the suspects with mail fraud, wire fraud, and conspiracy. February 1987. U.S. Courthouse. Foley Square reporters crowd the steps as the indictments are announced. Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, Vincent DiNapoli, and Edward DeLucia are named among 20 defendants accused of defrauding the federal government through sham property transfers. The indictment alleges that the group used a series of interrelated corporations and straw purchases to artificially inflate lease values of federally occupied properties between 1978 and 1985. Salerno is already under indictment in the famous commission case. Now, he faces new charges carrying up to 40 years in prison. When asked by reporters about the accusation, Salerno smiles. I rent to the government. That's not a crime. Behind the scenes, the government leans on Louis Ferraro, the accountant who brought them the evidence. He becomes the key witness, entering protective custody. In court, he describes how each sale was approved, notarized, and banked through legitimate channels, with no violence, no threats, just signatures. They didn't need to bribe anyone, Ferraro testifies. The system let them do it. Every office just wanted the paperwork to move. The jury listens in silence. The scale is almost unbelievable. The idea that the Mafia made millions not through drugs or gambling, but through bureaucratic oversight. By mid-1987, prosecutors introduce FBI wiretaps from the East Harlem Club. One plays in open court. Salerno's voice gravelly and calm. We got 10 names for one building. Each one's a paycheck. The defense argues it's taken out of context, but the damage is done. Over 6 weeks, testimony from accountants, bankers, and property managers paints a full picture. The mob didn't just infiltrate construction. It had embedded itself into the federal real estate system. Every inflated lease, every refinanced loan, every forged appraisal came with a taxpayer-funded payout. The verdict arrives in October 1987. Salerno, DiNapoli, and DeLucia are convicted on racketeering, mail fraud, and tax evasion charges. The court estimates the fraud at $83 million in total losses. Judge Mary Johnson. Lowe calls it a theft without guns, a white-collar heist conducted with city stamps instead of bullets. Salerno receives 100 years in prison, concurrent with his existing Mafia conviction. Di Napoli is sentenced to 24 years, De Lucia to 18. The case sends shockwaves through the Department of Housing and the GSA. For the first time, the federal government admits that organized crime had rented property back to itself, and the state paid for it. In Washington, congressional hearings follow. Hood officials testify about weak oversight. The FBI issues an internal report warning that organized crime had expanded from construction racketeering into direct federal contracting through lease manipulation. New safeguards are introduced, and independent appraisers, multi-tiered ownership disclosure laws, and stricter auditing of long-term leases. But as one senator notes on record, for nearly a decade, the Mafia didn't need to break in. The government handed them the keys. Washington, D.C., January 1988. In a hearing room lined with oak panels and microphones, a congressional committee begins reviewing Operation Leaseback. Stacks of documents line the tables: contracts, loan papers, government leases. The chairman opens with one line that summarizes everything. For nearly 10 years, the United States government was paying rent to the Mafia. The audience murmurs. The facts are no longer secret. Between 1978 and 1985, 30 federally leased properties in New York and New Jersey were owned or controlled by front companies tied to the Genovese and Lucchese crime families. The same buildings had been sold and resold through shell corporations, each time at inflated values, with federally insured loans backing every deal. The scam wasn't just a theft, it was a lesson in how bureaucracy could be turned into a business model. Federal investigators testify one by one. FBI Special Agent Thomas Kessler walks the committee through the timeline. The first tip, the hidden leases, the Ferraro briefcase, the wiretaps. He explains how the mob manipulated a loophole in the GSA's lease renewal process, which allowed automatic rent increases whenever new ownership occurred. Each new owner was another mob front. Each renewal meant another payout. They didn't steal the money, Kessler says. They made us sign it over. The fallout spreads fast. The General Services Administration launches a full audit of its property portfolio. Investigators find smaller versions of the same fraud in Philadelphia, Chicago, and Miami, though none as organized as New York's. The Department of Justice quietly reaches settlements with several banks that financed the deals, including Hudson Valley Savings and Loan, which collapses within a year amid insider trading charges. By 1989, 3 mid-level bank executives plead guilty to falsifying loan documents. None serve more than 2 years. The Mafia's leadership faces heavier punishment, but their money is already gone, laundered through offshore accounts and legitimate companies. The buildings remain in government hands, now legally purchased at their inflated values. The taxpayers end up owning the scam's leftovers. In New York, the cleanup begins. FBI task forces dismantle what's left of the construction cartel. The concrete club is gone. Its key players are either dead, imprisoned, or cooperating. Unions once loyal to the Genovese family are placed under federal supervision. But investigators soon realize the scheme didn't die. It evolved. By the early 1990s, new companies appear in the same neighborhoods, operated by relatives of the old guard. The names are different, but the strategy remains familiar. Paper ownership, inflated loans, fake appraisals. One Justice Department memo warns, the system that enabled leaseback still exists. Only the faces have changed. 1992, Sing Sing Correctional Facility. Anthony Fat Tony Salerno, age 81, sits in the prison infirmary. Convicted in both the commission case and the leaseback trial, he is serving a 100-year sentence. Guards say he spends his mornings reading financial newspapers, circling articles about government contracts. When asked by a journalist if he regrets the scheme, he laughs. "You think I built that building 10 times? No, I just sold it right." He dies of a stroke later that year. Vincent Di Napoli remains in federal custody until 1998. When released, he returns to the Bronx quietly, never speaking publicly about the case. He invests in real construction firms, all legitimate this time, and keeps his distance from organized crime. Edward De Lucia fades into obscurity. His name disappears from court dockets after 1991. For the government, Operation Leaseback becomes a closed chapter, buried beneath bigger stories like the savings and loan crisis and Wall Street scandals. But within the FBI, it's remembered as a turning point. The first time agents fully mapped how the mob had merged organized crime with white-collar fraud. In one internal review, an agent wrote, "They stopped hijacking trucks. They started hijacking paperwork." By the late 1990s, the Mafia's financial tactics influence a new generation of criminals, brokers, bankers, and politicians who studied how the mob used corporate structures to disguise theft. Some investigators trace patterns from leaseback-style deals straight into later corporate scandals. The tools changed, computers replaced ledgers, but the method stayed the same. Sell the same thing twice, then make the buyer pay for it again. New York City, 2005. The building at 120 Hudson Street still stands. The paint is newer, the tenant's different, but the walls are the same. Now it houses a regional office of a logistics company. Few who work there know that the site once sat at the center of a $100 million fraud, the original deed trail, the 10 resales that fooled the government, remains locked in the National Archives under Operation Leaseback Real Estate Fraud 1985-1987. In 2010, a Freedom of Information Act request releases partial files. The documents confirm much of what was long suspected. The same small circle of lawyers and accountants handled every transaction. The same notary stamps appear on multiple independent deeds, and in the margin of one document, next to a transfer fee of $412,000, someone wrote a note in pencil. Gov pays, we collect. No one ever determined who wrote it. Today, historians of organized crime view Operation Leaseback as the final phase of the traditional American mafia, the moment when mobsters abandoned street crime for corporate fraud. It was the bridge between the world of Lucky Luciano and the era of Wall Street corruption. The same strategies, shell companies, offshore accounts, money laundering, later appeared in major corporate scandals from Enron to AIG. The difference was simple. When the Mafia did it, it was called racketeering. When corporations did it, it was called Finance Manhattan present day. The original FBI building where Kessler ran his task force is now under renovation. New agents walk the same halls, chasing cybercrime and data theft instead of paper fraud. Few remember the case that proved the government could be robbed with its own signatures. On Kessler's retirement plaque, engraved in small letters, is his favorite line from the investigation. "You don't need a mask to steal a fortune, just a pen and a form that says approved." In the end, the mob didn't need to break into vaults or banks. They built their own out of real estate and red tape. And for nearly a decade, the United States government kept depositing money into it, willingly. Within months, the headlines faded, the buildings changed hands again, and the paper trail was filed away in storage. But for the men who ran it and the agents who chased it, the story never really ended. Because somewhere, someone is still finding a new way to sell the same thing twice,